establishment, financial class, financial establishment, can only dictate to the vast majority because the vast majority cooperate with the diktats and the laws imposed by the few. When we stop cooperating with laws that are unjust, with laws that are simply designed to take our freedoms away, that are designed to control our lives and what we can do and what we can't do in terms of free choice and free thought, when we stop cooperating with them and say we're not doing it, no, we're not abiding by that. We're not abiding by that. We're not going to let you build a prison and we put the bricks together, thank you very much. We're not doing it. If someone comes out of the White House, Clinton or Trump or anybody else, or out of Downing Street, and said we've had a meeting and we've decided that this is what's going to happen, it only happens if people, the vast majority, say, well, we better do it, it's the law. Well, that means whoever, the tiny few, that dictate the laws, no matter what they may be, impose their will on the vast majority. This is the next stage of awakening to how the world works. Not seeing some person as an outsider who's going to come and change everything. I think we're going to see in coming months that is not the case. In terms of what people think will happen. But to realize that the only way to stop the few imposing their will on the many is for the many to stop cooperating with the few, and the dictates and the laws, the rules and regulations of the few, where they are specifically designed to destroy free thought, free expression, and freedom of choice. So while, I think, like I say, people are going to be disappointed with what follows on, this is another significant expression that people have had enough. It's like a primal scream, a cry for help, a scream of frustration that was expressed through this vote for Trump. A scream of frustration at having no one listen to you. Having no one think about your interests when they're stitching up the world. And that's a good thing. But there are many stages, I would suggest, of this to go yet. And one of them is that we don't think that any person through the political system is going to change the world for the better, because we have to do that. And we have to do that together. An estimated 1.4 million of the UK's dogs are yet to be registered as the microchipping deadline looms. Thousands of dog owners are set to face fines of several £100s, as more than 1 million dogs have still not been microchipped before the law is imposed to register them. 8 million dogs, apparently, have now been microchipped. Oh, it's the law, you got a microchip. All dogs must be microchipped under a new legal requirement which sees the creation of the National Canine Database, Human Database. The new measures aim to create a central database listing every dog, brackets human, making every pet owner responsible for the registration. It is hoped this will reduce the number of dogs being dumped, as well as the lucrative black market trade in animals. Now, every single law has at least two meanings. One is the meaning they tell you about so that you will accept it. Oh, no, it's good because these are all the benefits of it. And then there's another part of the law, the real reason for the law, which they don't tell you about, which is the totalitarian tiptoe here to human microchipping. It says the sterile microchip is roughly the size of a grain of rice and is implanted just under your dog's skin between its shoulder blades. Each chip contains a unique identification number that is listed on a national database which holds all the owner's contact details, such as their address and phone number, brackets humans. Lee Paris, campaigns manager at the charity The Dogs Trust. See, this is the thing. I have this phrase, my dot is the only dot. People look at their personal dot, their personal focus, and that's all they can see. They can't connect their dot to other dots to see the picture. And the picture here is not what this guy and people like him believe, that this is what microchipping of dogs is all about. It's actually about moving on step by step to the microchipping of humans. Anyway, he says, having a dog microchipped should give owners peace of mind. Have your child microchipped, it will give you peace of mind. You'll be hearing that one. Because all dogs have the capacity to escape no matter how responsible the owner is. This will make it much easier to reunite worried owners with their pets. Knock it forward. This would help the state reunite with fugitives or people challenging the state or trying to get away from the state for what are they're doing and saying about the state. Microchips have been a legal requirement in Northern Ireland since 2012. Now England, Scotland and Wales are set to follow suit. Nearly 120,000 dogs are dumped or lost each year, and less than half of those are reunited with their owners. And this story in a national newspaper then goes on to give more reasons why microchipping your dog is a good thing. How long before they're telling us that microchipping humans and your children is a good thing. So what we're looking at is a process, the tiptoe process, which is mirroring that of dogs and animals. To introduce microchipping of humans voluntarily, it's already started, my goodness. And then to make it impossible virtually to function unless you're microchipped. I mean, take the example of the credit card. It's more and more difficult to function without a credit card, even if you don't want one. And that's the process of microchipping. To, first of all, it's voluntary, then making it almost impossible to function without one in terms of interacting with society. And then, like this, to make them compulsory. And we're seeing the most obvious sequence where people are being, pulled in on the fishing line without realizing that that's what's happening. So, first of all, you get people addicted to technology which they hold, holdables, shall we call them. And of course, that part is massively already achieved. Oh yeah. So what you say? What you say? What? Can't take their eyes off the frickin' things. It's an addiction to holdables. Stage 1. Stage 2, wearables. All got names, these stages. Wearables. This is your Google Glass. This is your Bluetooth on your ear. This is your smart watch. Now we've moved from here to on the skin, on the body. Ooh, getting closer now. And the next stage, they're already talking about it. It's already happening. Is what they call implantables. Microchips and other transhumanist technology. And the idea is that once you get this technology inside you, pull them in, have you seen the latest smartphone? Oh yeah, Apple's got another one out. Oh, you better queue in the middle of the night to get the first one. once you have this technology inside you, you will be technologically connected to sources of thought, perception, that will mean that the human part of you is no more. Technology will be literally thinking for you. And I set all this out in my new book, Phantom Self, and put it in the context of the modern world and how it's happening before our eyes. And so when you look at the scale of surveillance that's happening now to protect us from terrorism, honest, it's extraordinary. Little list. First of all, not just getting your fingerprints, but getting them from 20 feet or more away through these technologies today. Mobile backscatter vans, where the authorities going around in unmarked vans, basically X-raying your car, your vehicle, anything they want to, just like when you're going through airports. And these are now being introduced. Never mind if you're in the way when they're X-raying something. Well, bad luck, mate. Better get down the hospital fast. Not that they'll help you. Unmanned drones. Now we're having drones being introduced. My goodness me, the scale that is being talked about will blow people away. They're even hijacking the sky now. And these are unmanned drones, some of them armed, that will be flying around with cameras, keeping surveillance on everybody. Protect us from terrorism. Honest. Then we've got biometrics, biometric databases where they keep surveillance on people based on their unique physical and behavioral traits. Biometrics comes from two Greek words meaning, in effect, measuring life. Automated license plate readers, cameras all over the place. So when your car goes past, they take your number plate, they know where you are. Face reading software. When you're not in a car, they know where you are. Data mining, all these massive taking of personal data. Street lights spying on us. Yes, they call them IntelliStreets. These are street lamps which will also project Wi-Fi everywhere. It's the idea anyway. That will have microphones listening to conversations in the street. Then there's, of course, internet activity, constantly under surveillance there. In terms of people that are not on their radar, they can go and find it if they choose to later, and people on their radar actually in real time, seeing what they're doing on the internet. Pre-crime surveillance cameras. These are cameras that are making judgments on whether you're likely to commit a crime or not. And the idea is that you get arrested early, before you do it, even though you weren't going to do it. And we have now, we have these cameras and biometrics and all these forms of surveillance and security in schools getting more and more extreme. And all that is getting children and young people used to constant total surveillance so that it becomes their norm. So when they go out into an adult world, by which time it will be big time further on than we are now in terms of surveillance, these technologies and new ones come in all the time, that they won't, this is the idea, they won't react against it, they won't challenge it, they won't question it, because they've been brought up surrounded by it in the schools, thus it's their norm. And this is what's happening. We shouldn't forget that. You know, I was born in 1952, before all this really in-your-face stuff started. So I'm able to have a perspective from seeing what was to seeing what is. Young people coming into the world now, this is their norm. And it's fantastic that so many young people are actually seeing it and challenging it despite that. And we are told that all of this constant 24/7 surveillance with now telescreens, Orwell's telescreens, now called smart TVs, that can film you in your own home, with smart phones that can keep surveillance on you wherever you go. And by the way, the smart TVs are only Mark 1 of this. Wait till the next lot and the next lot and the next lot come out with more and more surveillance capability in your own home. So we're told all of this is to protect us from terrorism. And that's one of the benefits of this mass of state-sponsored, state-organized, state-engineered terrorism. It's to provide an excuse, other reasons too, that benefit this agenda for global control. But one is they can then justify more and more of this nonsense that people say, oh, well, I know I don't like it, but we've got to be protected from the terrorists. Well, let's put this in perspective. It's about time. This is an article from the New Yorker. In 2014, terrorist attacks caused just 37 deaths in Western countries, 0.11% of the global tally. Yes, the numbers go up and they go down year by year, but there's a figure that puts in perspective the kind of numbers and the area of numbers we're talking about. 37 died from terrorist attacks in Western countries in 2014, and then take into account that much of the terrorism is state created as a create the problem to offer the solution scenario. During the 15 years from 2000 to 2014, the vast majority of these deaths resulted from terrorism in the West, resulted from 4 incidents: the 9/11 attacks in the United States, the 2004 train bombings in Madrid, the transit bombings in London in 2005, and the 2011 gun massacre and bombing in Norway. Every single one of those has massive questions. I mean, 9/11, don't start me. Massive questions and blatant discrepancies, often of a blatant variety in terms of the official story of what is supposed to have happened there. But let's just contrast that. 2014, 37 people in Western countries died from terrorist attacks. Figures from the European Society for Cardiology for cardiovascular disease in Europe in the same year, 2014. Deaths from various forms of cardiovascular disease in Europe alone, never mind the United States and other Western countries, 1.3 million compared with 37. And there was another 700,000 died from cardiovascular disease in the United States as well. Cancer deaths in America alone, never mind the other Western countries in Europe, more than 500,000 a year. Deaths on American roads in 2014, more than 32,000, and that's without all the other countries in the West. Deaths from alcohol in the United States alone every year, 88,000. Number of deaths in 2014 in Western countries from terrorism, including state-sponsored terrorism, 37. Anti-terrorism spending 50,000 times more than any other cause of death. The US spends more than $500 million per victim on anti-terrorism efforts. However, cancer research spending is only $10,000 per victim. Evolutionary psychology, this article says, may offer an explanation for this irrational threat amplification. You don't need all that stuff. It's because the conspiracy wants all the spending to protect us from terrorism, because it's not protecting us from terrorism, it's building the global surveillance control system state. And it wants people to die once they can't serve the system anymore, when they get older. And thus, as one insider says, they might as well die of cancer as something else. Thus, the fantastic discrepancy on spending between protecting from terrorism and protecting from cancer. The article goes on to the least likely means of death mentioned here, terrorism. The federal government devotes about $150 billion annually. On the other hand, to combat the most likely cause of death, heart disease, the government contributes only $2 billion. $2 billion as opposed to $150 billion. And just $300 million is devoted to research on the third most likely cause of death, strokes. And it concludes, so looking at it another way, we spend $500 million for every death from terrorism and only $2,000 for every death resulting from strokes. That means we spend 250,000 times more per death on terrorism. And then we are told that we must fight terrorism as well as keep people under total surveillance to protect them from terrorism. We must fight terrorism because we must stop people being killed. Really. Deaths from fighting terrorism compared with terrorism itself. In 2014, terrorist attacks caused just 37 deaths in Western countries, 0.11% of the global tally. Relative to this year, that was relatively peaceful, but it's a figure that can be used to compare the vast differences that I'm highlighting here. The Washington, D.C.-based Physicians for Social Responsibility released a landmark study concluding that the death toll from 10 years of the war on terror since the 9/11 attacks is at least 1.3 million and could be as high as 2 million. According to other figures, total deaths from Western interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan since the 1990s, from direct killings and the longer-term impact of war-imposed deprivation, are likely to constitute around 4 million people, and could be as high as 6 to 8 million people when accounting for higher avoidable death estimates in Afghanistan. Such figures could well be too high, it says, but we'll never know for sure. Why not? Because US and UK armed forces, as a matter of policy, refuse to keep track of the civilian death toll of military operations. They are an irrelevant inconvenience. Due to the severe lack of data in Iraq, almost complete non-existence of records in Afghanistan, and the indifference of Western governments to civilian deaths, it is literally impossible to determine the true extent of loss of life. So, even on guesstimates, the number of people who have been killed in the war and by the war against terrorism is in the millions and millions and millions. Whereas a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that, even tinier if you take away state-sponsored terrorism, has killed people through terrorism itself. Now, of course, if one person gets killed by terrorism, it's terrible. But putting it all in perspective, the idea that this emerging, so fast emerging, surveillance global state is to protect people from terrorism is ludicrous. It is there to build the control system, the total control system, down to the fine detail of people's lives. And of course, the migrant crisis, opening the doors like Chancellor Merkel in Germany, just opening the doors, no matter what, and no matter who, has opened many things, but it's certainly opened, as I pointed out at the time when it started, it's opened the opportunity to say, well, we've got all these people now, all these Muslims coming into Europe, and among them are terrorists and jihadists. So we have to have more surveillance, more control to protect you from them. It's so blatant when you connect the dots. So this week, here's a headline: staggering number of European jihadists. EU's own agency admits terrorists are exploiting migrant crisis as illegal border crossings hit record 1.82 million. I remember doing an interview just as this migrant crisis started and pointing out that this was coming. Oh, there's all these jihadists now in Europe because of this, and we've got to do this and that and the other to protect you from them. And just another excuse to put the agenda forward and into even greater overdrive. Mass migration is allowing terrorists to sneak into the EU, its own border agency admitted last night, wants you to believe. In a devastating report, it said the Paris attacks proved jihadists were exploiting the refugee crisis. The Frontex agency logged a record 1.82 million illegal crossings into the EU last year, 6 times more than in 2014. But it said it had no idea how many illegal immigrants there were, and in any case had no way of tracing their movements inside the EU. Officials also warned a staggering number of European citizens had become jihadists and were taking advantage of lax border controls. Problem, reaction, solution. And with the whole transhumanist agenda, which is coming in all the time via holdables, wearables, implantables, the scale of human control down to thought and emotion even is planned eventually to be total. And we look at people in the system, vast numbers of people in the system, in uniforms and caps of law enforcement, etc., security, in the dark suit, bureaucratic web in every country. And the vast majority of them are introducing and enforcing these laws, these surveillance technologies, and the daily destruction of more and more of the most basic freedoms, while having no idea whatsoever of the consequences and the agenda that they are creating and serving. There are, again, classic examples of my dot is the only dot. And yet, every day, they are contributing to not only their own enslavement and the enslavement of people here today, adults today, but this is not where it's meant to end. This is where it is now. And if people think it's bad now, what's it going to be like for their children and grandchildren by the time they're adults? And it's so important that young people today who are old enough to be able to have a voice focus on this, because it's their world we're talking about. I mean, it's our world already, with all this stuff already going on, and will continue to go on among or during the lives of older people. But young people, people in the schools, in the colleges and universities and elsewhere, this is your world we are seeing being constructed. If you don't focus on it now, then when are you going to do it? Further down the line, when there's more surveillance, more control, and challenging it gets more and more difficult? That's the same for everybody. When are we going to draw the line and then start running the line back? There's billions of people in the world. The number of people who are driving this in full knowledge that they're driving it and where they want it to go is tiny, tiny compared with that. So anyone who gets access to this information and then thinks the way to respond is to watch something by Simon Cowell, some game show or whatever, or whatever diversion, and not actually focus on what matters, which is their own freedom disappearing by the day, then they'll just have to live with what's coming if nothing is done. And we are now looking at increasing efforts at censorship. You know, I've come across it with Facebook and others, to stop information alerting people to what the plan is, not just in terms of surveillance, but across the great spectrum of this transformation of society into a post-human state. And thus, this is not going to just, like I say, stop here, this censorship, here and no further. It's going to go on. They're going to try to eventually silence everybody. I mean, what have we come to when, you know, the Green Party, that's supposed to be this liberal political party about freedom, that wants to silence and have silenced in the media people challenging the lie of human-caused global warming. And so what we're looking at now are the people you would expect to be defending freedom who are actually calling for freedom to be deleted. Look at what's happening in colleges and universities in the West, where once upon a time, when I was a kid, students went on marches demanding freedom of speech. Now they go out protesting against freedom of speech. Oh no, want a safe space. Don't want to be upset. We had a situation of last week where students at a college in America said they were literally traumatized by seeing that someone had written Trump 2016 in chalk on the pavement. We're going through a genetic mutation where people are born without backbones. And while all this is going on, their freedoms are being taken away all the time. We're taking your freedoms away, but we're going to give you a safe space. You won't be upset anymore because now we've got control of your mind and your emotions. We can stop you being upset about anything or thinking about anything worth thinking about. The scale of this human control, I mean, you just get into the transhumanist side of this and you'll see it's eventually, indeed it's already happening, about control of thought and control of emotion. So there's no human left. And here we are. Here we are, facing all this. And every day I watch the explosion of divide and rule, playing white people off against black people, Muslims off against Christians, Hindus and Jews, and all these labels for people. They're all played off against each other. It's the Muslims, it's the so-and-so, it's the so-and-so. And yet, does anyone think that only white people are going to be microchipped? Or only Muslims, or only Hindus? It's everybody. We're all in this together, and the divide and rule is to stop us coming together to, in unity, say enough. Well, unless we do, and fast, there's going to be a time of colossal mass regret that we didn't do so. This is not something that's sometime never over the rainbow. This is happening now, and it's happening in more extreme terms all the time. We better address it, we better face it together while we still can. If that is true, then what do you have to tell people for? If they're just nutters, well, leave them. They're not a problem, are they? Who's going to believe nutters? Not many. The problem for them is that what we're saying does have validity. And people perceiving world events are increasingly realizing that it makes more sense to see that these events are manipulated into place rather than they're acting or happening by random accident. And so this problem is being met with more and more attempts to dismiss and discredit people who are actually uncovering what's really happening, as opposed to the movie script that we're told by the mainstream media. We've had in very recent times the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, feeling it necessary for some reason to say publicly that the conspiracy, because that's what it is, to manipulate the result of the EU referendum, in and out public referendum, is not a David Icke style conspiracy. Why would he feel the need to say that? And we're having academia more and more coming in, saying that people that believe in conspiracy theories have some kind of psychological problem. And if that's true, what is the problem for authority that makes it feel the need to try more and more, and we've seen nothing yet, to discredit those who are uncovering what those in authority don't want the public to know? This is David Cameron. He took a break in 2014 from selling snake oil to speak at the UN General Assembly. And he was talking about conspiracies when it was about defeating the ideology of extremism. The peddling of lies about a 9/11 plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged, and the idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy are conspiracy theories. The fact that Muslims are being persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy is a conspiracy theory. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. It's not happening, it's just a theory. And talking about the conspiracy theory of a concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. It's happening. And even though they're all true, because they're all true, they have to be discredited with this term conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory, which actually came into more widespread use as a result of a deliberate policy of using that term by the CIA to discredit those uncovering the real background to the Kennedy assassination and other assassinations in the 60s, like that of Martin Luther King. We must be clear, Snake Oil Man went on. To defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. Now, I'm going to pass that, not just violent extremism, through our Orwellian translation unit. And it comes out as, we must silence those telling the truth about what we're really doing. He goes on. For governments, there are some obvious ways we can do this. We must ban preachers of hate from coming to our countries. We must prescribe organizations that incite terrorism against people at home and abroad. Now, that's the front. A lot of people now, genuine peaceful protesters and activists, are asking why they are being prosecuted or blocked by laws that were brought in on the pretext of fighting terrorism. Because the answer is that that's exactly what it was, a pretext. You look at these anti-terrorism laws and they're so widely applicable in the way they're written on purpose that they can be applied against anybody. That's the idea, just to get them in. So when Cameron's talking here about extremism and terrorism, what he's really talking about is, in the wider context, as we move through, targeting those who are uncovering the truth or protesting about government policy. He says we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists. Non-violent extremists are people who are exposing through words and peaceful ways what the government is and the authorities in general are really doing. We must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Intolerance. Intolerance for governments lying to us is what he's talking about. Of course, he says, there will be those who will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. He should have added, but then that's the idea. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism exposing the government peacefully. But the right-wing extremists in government, they're not a problem. And the racists in government, they're not a problem. And he says, to combat this, we must support the building blocks of free and open societies. So when's he going to start in Britain then? This is a man who is so blatantly manipulating and engineering through lies and suppression of the alternative to the lies, the European referendum, talking about a free and open society. And then, after 9/11, when, all that mayhem's taking place, George Bush, boy George Bush, said, again in an address to the United Nations, November the 10th, 2001, he denounced the emergence of, quote, outrageous conspiracy theories that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty. Again, all that mayhem, and he has to go out and make a specific point about conspiracy theories, giving another version of really what happened on 9/11. Why? Because the official story of 9/11 is so full of holes. It's a joke. And it's not about shifting blame away from the terrorists. It's shifting the blame away from the patsies and those blamed for it to hide the fact that the real terrorists, those in the shadows that were ultimately controlling Boy Bush, were the real people responsible for 9/11. Then we have the Obama administration. Top Obama czar infiltrate all conspiracy theorists. We're nutters, right? What's the problem? We're not. That's the problem. Story goes, in a lengthy academic paper, President Obama's regulatory czar, Cass Sunstein, argued the US government should ban conspiracy theorizing. Among the beliefs Sunstein would ban is advocating that the theory of global warming is a deliberate fraud, which it is. Now, if the basis of the global warming claims is so powerful and so obvious and so overwhelming, what is the problem of nutters challenging that official story? What problem could something that is so blatantly true, so they claim, have with a few people saying it's not? To the point where the US government should ban conspiracy theorizing. Why? Because, just like 9/11, the official story of global warming and what became climate change when the temperature stopped rising is as full of holes and as nonsensical and as unsustainable as what happened on September the 11th, 2001, according to the official story. Sunstein also recommended the government send agents to infiltrate extremists who supply conspiracy theories to disrupt the efforts of the extremists to propagate their theories. Note, what we're seeing, just mentioned it, but the confirmation goes on and on now. They're trying to associate people who expose conspiracies behind world events. In fact, if people read my books at length, it's actually one gigantic conspiracy with many faces. They are equating, or trying to in the public mind, extremism, extremists, fear, with people called conspiracy, or poke yourself in the eye, people called conspiracy theorists who are exposing the government. In a 2008 Harvard law paper, Conspiracy Theories, how appropriate, Sunstein and a co-author who was a Harvard law professor, ooh, he must be clever, ask, what can government do about conspiracy theories? I've got a question. Why do they feel there's anything to do about them if they're so nonsensical and obviously so? Quote, we can readily imagine a series of possible responses. One, government might ban conspiracy theorizing. Two, I mean, you know, pinch me. Ouch, it's true, he actually said this. Governments might impose some kind of tax, financial or otherwise, on those who disseminate such theories. In a 30-page paper, Sunstein argues the best government response to conspiracy theories is cognitive infiltration of extremist groups. Why? They're nutters, aren't they? As I keep asking. Then we've got the academic side. You know, God save us from academia. Please. I'll be a good boy. Just God save us from academia. This is a story this week. Believe in conspiracy theories? You're probably a narcissist. People who doubt, in effect, what they're saying, official versions of events, are likely to be selfish and attention-seeking. Whoa. It goes on. Through a number of online studies, not many it turns out, researchers at the University of Kent have showed strong links between the belief in conspiracy theories and those with narcissism and low self-esteem. Who says they found it? They did. In the internet age, conspiracy theories can incubate in quiet corners of the web. Ooh. But it may be psychological predispositions of believers which keep them alive rather than cold, hard facts. See, what they do with so-called conspiracy theories and conspiracy research is they give the impression all the time that it's just a theory. You know, they're just sitting in a darkened room and coming to these conclusions. This is just one of my books. Thin, isn't it? The background information, the background supporting evidence for the fact that there is a global conspiracy to turn this into a global prison state, unfolding by the day, by the way, just watch the news and your own life experience, that somehow there is no evidence when it's enormous. But they don't go there, because they go there, they're on a loser. Let's have an open debate about this. No, they don't. I was on a television program once with an academic from the University of London, I think it was. And this is a guy who, for anything alternative whatsoever, is akin to him to garlic to a vampire. He comes from the Richard Dawkins school of the concrete mind. And he's having a go at what I'm saying and what have you, as the cameras are rolling. And I said to him, have you ever read any of my books? And he said, no. So how do you know what I'm saying, especially in detail? I've read it in the papers. This is an academic that we're supposed to be taking seriously in terms of some kind of knowledge of what they're talking about. Anyway, this story goes on about the University of Kent. Over the course of 3 online-based studies, researchers at the University of Kent showed strong links between the belief in conspiracy theories and negative psychological traits. Writing in the journal Social, Psychological and Personality Science, the team explained. Previous research linked the endorsement of conspiracy theories to low self-esteem. Now, one of the things that's building up here, and you'll see build up more and more, is not just a connection between those that can see conspiracies to manipulate world events and terrorism, terrorists, but also the link between people that believe the government's lying and people with psychological problems. And this link's going to be made more and more strongly as we move along. And if people think that's far-fetched, well, look what happened in the Soviet Union. How many dissidents against the Soviet Union tyranny, exposing the tyranny, ended up in mental hospitals to keep them quiet because they were challenging the official version of the Soviet state. Thus they had to be crazy, they had to be mad by definition. The results of these surveys, where they asked people if they agreed with specific statements as to whether governments, for instance, carried out acts of terrorism on their own soil, yes. The results showed that those people who rated highly on the narcissist scale and who had low self-esteem were more likely to be conspiracy believers. Who says? They do. Lead author of the study, a lecturer in social psychology at Kent, again, must be clever, told SciPost.org, because conspiracy theories often refer to malevolent actions of groups, we wanted to distinguish whether it is a narcissistic image of the self or the group that predicts the endorsement of conspiracy theories. Note, it's never, is it the truth that predicts or accepts and endorses conspiracy claims in terms of explaining world events. The link they miss is the link between those who believe in conspiracies and those who believe, because they're intelligent, that governments and those in authority lie. And in terms of evidence, we only have the entire span of known human history to support that obvious fact. And then we've had people, I mentioned it in a video cast recently, we've had some academic who reckons he can prove that conspiracy theories are not true through maths. Note, truth is never part of their equation. You know, we are led to believe, and we are pressured and encouraged to believe, that we must look to academia to tell us what we need to know about the world, because they're clever and they're at university and they've got letters after their name, mate. My experience, and if people looked into this subject more deeply, I'm sure it would be the experience of so many others, is that far from being the bastion of knowledge, most, and I mean most, academia is the pollution of intelligence, because its range of thinking, its range of the possible, is akin to the size of a pea. And I'm being optimistic. People say we must be skeptical. No, we mustn't. We must question. You see, there's such a difference between a skeptic and one who questions. Because one who questions, and people should question everything, including what I say, and see if it stands up. But one who questions is questioning in pursuit of the truth. A skeptic, like those very sad people in the skeptic societies around the world, their foundation from the start is that anything outside their pea-sized norm is not true. So their skepticism is not questioning if something's true, it's setting out from the start to try to convince people that it's not. And that That is the mentality that infests and infects so much of what we call academia. And so we have this consensus between academics and politicians and journalists that somehow any idea that there is a conspiracy must be nutty, must be dismissed by reflex action, and, oh, let's cut and paste that. What's that phrase again? Conspiracy theorist. That's it. He's a nutter. He's a conspiracy theorist. That's how it works. And so you have journalists who are so, again, infected by the arrogance of ignorance that they ridicule and dismiss those who are actually doing the job that they should be doing, but don't, as song sheet singers for the system. So let's just look for a second at the official definition of a conspiracy. A secret plan made by two or more people to do something that is harmful or illegal. Now, on that basis, how many conspiracies are there going on at all levels of society every day? The act of secretly planning to do something that is harmful or illegal. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that weren't. Classic. Now, a conspiracy theory is officially defined as this: a theory that explains an event as being the result of a plot by a covert group or organization, a belief that a particular unexplained event was caused by such a group. So people don't conspire in secret to bring about the end that they all desire. That doesn't happen. Apparently not. 2, definition of conspiracy theory: the idea that many important political events or economic and social trends are the products of secret plots that are largely unknown to the general public. How much does the general public know about what's going on in authority and government and the banking system and the corporations? How much do they know? I mean, it's almost in mathematical terms, almost indescribable. It's so small, the amount that the public know about what's really going on compared with what's going on in the shadows and the meetings. But no, it's all a myth. And so what we're being asked to believe, in effect, is that governments tell the truth, and thus there can be no conspiracies by governments to manipulate events by telling lies to bring about an end they want. And what I love, people talk about conspiracy theories, and these academics and journalists and politicians talk about conspiracy theorists. Do you know, for me, the strangest people of all are the coincidence theorists. They're the ones, academics, journalists, politicians, great numbers still members of the public, who think that all these connections, all these names that keep coming up, all these organizations that keep coming up across a great swathe of different areas, all this information showing the connections between apparently unconnected people, organizations, and events is all a coincidence. I mean, I think that's a psychological flaw, I think it's a case of terminal naivety. Maybe the University of Kent should do a study. Be interesting. So, here we are in a situation where, for instance, war criminals like Tony Blair and Boy George Bush and all the people around them and behind them, where the real power is, told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, knowing there weren't. They lied through sexed up dossiers. They lied in public statements about the threat of Saddam Hussein because they wanted to invade Iraq because it was on the list of countries to be invaded, which included Libya, Syria, etc. So it comes out, obviously, some of us conspiracy theorists said it before it came out, weapons of mass destruction is a joke. It comes out there weren't any. So there was, under any definition of conspiracy, there was a conspiracy to delude the public into supporting or not opposing the invasion of Iraq on grounds that were known by those that were selling them to be absolutely spurious. But then you say, or you hear, that any idea that there was a conspiracy over 9/11 is a conspiracy theory, and they're all mad. It's sobering to ponder on the following. Not just the same agencies, but the very same people who told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when they knew they weren't, were the very same people that gave us the official story of 9/11. And what does it say about alleged journalists worldwide? That despite what has been justified in horror and war, slaughter and suffering, on the basis of the official 9/11 story being true, despite all that, despite the same people telling us that story, telling us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when they weren't, I have come across yet no credible mainstream media investigation into whether that official story of 9/11 is true. Do you know, I kind of something to encapsulate mainstream journalists and politicians and what have you. I listened to an interview this week with an investment banker. It was an investment banker who operated at a high level in the financial system. And it just shows you how the truth is kept from people, even in the system. That he was an investment banker working in global finance for a long time before he actually realized and grasped how money is created. The fact that money is created out of nothing, out of fresh air on computer screens by private banks, which gives them control of the entire financial system. And as those banks ultimately are controlled by the same network, it gives that network control over the whole financial system. If you go to my website, on the home page, there's a video explanation of how money is created and the whole financial scam. Anyway, eventually, after years in the business at a high level, he realizes, hey, how money is created. He realizes the whole financial system is a scam. He then, with others, puts an event together where he's going to explain the whole financial scam and how money's created out of nothing by private banks. He sends invitations to 1,200 journalists and 179 politicians just to come and see the presentation. Not one single one of any of them replied and certainly did not turn up. And these are the people who are ridiculing in their arrogance of ignorance people who can see what they choose not to see. And so what we are seeing and will see more of are attempts to discredit conspiracy researchers. We're now having Google, YouTube, owned by Google, Facebook, even Twitter's coming into it now, in terms of censoring information or trying to undermine the alternative media in many and various ways. We're having this right to be forgotten law extended, announced this very week, where people can be taken out of Google search engines, in effect, because they've just asked to be taken out because they don't like what someone said about them. And what this is, this right to be forgotten, is simply a stepping stone towards George Orwell's memory hole, where information that the authorities don't want people to see just disappears. Google to extend right to be forgotten to all its domains accessed in the EU, it's EU law. Google will begin blocking search results across all its domains when a search takes place within Europe in an extension of how it implements the right to be forgotten ruling. The ruling allows EU residents to request the removal of search results that they feel link to outdated and irrelevant information they don't want people to see, about themselves on a country-by-country basis. And this is just the start. They'll want to extend this worldwide. You watch. And now, again, continuing this theme of questioning the official story to terrorism, we have a situation where young people who question government or media may be extremists, officials tell parents, because you've got to get to the kids, because they're the adults of tomorrow. You don't want them awake. Oh, my goodness, nightmare. Child protection officials have been criticised after warning parents that young people who take issue, wait for this, who take issue with government policy or question what they're told in the media may have been radicalised by extremists. A leaflet drawn up by the Inner City Child Safeguarding Board, how Orwellian is that? Warns that, by the way, does this Child Safeguarding Board have a branch in Westminster? If it doesn't, well, what's it doing? So the board warns that appearing angry about government policies, especially foreign policies, is a sign specific to radicalisation. So if you're angry about a government owned by the bankers imposing suffering, austerity and poverty on a vast number of people, you are becoming radicalized as an extremist. You see the constant connection in all these different areas. The same theme is being underlined all the time. Parents and carers have been advised by the Safeguarding Children Board in the London Borough of Camden that showing a mistrust of mainstream media reports and a belief in conspiracy theories could be a sign that children are being groomed by extremists. The leaflet says children who show a combination of these and other signs may be en route to emulating those who have been persuaded to leave the country in secret and against the wishes of their family, putting themselves in extreme danger as a result. You see how they're connecting, questioning all areas of the official story with extremists, especially extremists heading off to Syria. This is the psychological mind game that's going on to get people to put the two together in their minds. Local safeguarding children boards are mandated by government all around the country under the Children's Act of 2004. And we're going to see more and more of this because they want to shut down all questioning of anything outside the official norm. And that, as I've said in a recent video cast, is what political correctness is all about. The idiots that extremists in political correctness who seek to impose those destroying pressures on freedom of speech that make people frightened to speak their mind and speak their truth. They're just agents of government. But they have no idea that that's what they are, because they're idiots. Bella Sankey, policy director of the campaign group Liberty, criticised the leaflet. Children should be encouraged to take an interest in politics and think critically about what they see in the media, not deemed suspect for doing so. But that is the idea, to make that the case. And so we have had kids at school reported to the authorities and the police for doing things like going to the UKIP website, which is an official political party fighting elections in this country, actually opposing the EU. What was this other one? An A-level student was reported to the police by his headmaster, to the police, for criticising the school in a blog. The student was apparently, according to the headmaster, developing into an anarchist. I wonder if I should report the headmaster for developing into an idiot. See, what we have here is a very simple situation. Not every last fact, not every last claim that conspiracy researchers say about the world is 100% accurate. And there are those who say things that I shake my head about because there's nothing to support it. But the fact is, the great body of conspiracy research, which is cross-referencing information and cross-referencing conclusions, is explaining why the world is as it is, why the few control the world, why we've reached a point now where 1% of the population owns around 50% of the wealth of the world, why this is not an accident, why this is not random. It's designed, it's a conspiracy to bring this about. Just as there's a conspiracy, the same conspiracy, different face, to bring about a police state so the 1% can impose their will on the rest of the population. And when you are selling lies to try to persuade the public that events are random when they're all going in a particular direction, you don't want them to see that. You want them to see dots, not pictures. When your whole foundation of what you want to achieve is based on lies, then of course what you have to do is suppress sources telling the truth about what you're doing and exposing what you're doing. And that's what we're seeing now, and that's why this whole thing with conspiracy theorists is increasing all the time. And we're also seeing that more and more people are looking at these explanations and going, well, you know, they make more sense of the world than what the authorities have done in us. And this is why audiences for mainstream media organizations are falling, many like a stone. And the audience for the alternative media is increasing and increasing and increasing. As long as people are getting crazier and crazier and crazier, it's because they're awakening to what's really going on more and more. And you'll see these attacks on the alternative media, people like me and many others around the world, the alternative media in general. You'll see them increasing. See, in terms of my case, they have tried for years and years and years to dismiss me and discredit me through ridicule. That Ike's mad. But it hasn't worked. It's worked with people that will believe anything and don't read what someone's saying so they can see with their own mind. But with intelligent people, more and more and more, truly intelligent people, not academically intelligent people as they claim, which is not really intelligence, most of it. It's cleverness, which is very different. Remembering facts is cleverness. Intelligence is making sense of those facts. And actually seeing that many of the facts aren't facts at all. So they're trying to ridicule me, but more and more people are looking at what I'm doing anyway. I'm just about to start a world tour. I'm going to talk to thousands of people all over the world, literally all over the world. So the ridicule's not worked. So what you'll see, and it will be the case with the alternative media in general, is it will turn to hostility and to antagonism and condemnation and all that stuff. And what's happening now is summed up in this quote by Gandhi. First they ignore you, been there. Then they laugh at you, been there. Then they fight you, coming. Then you win, coming. Extraordinary scale of human surveillance by the NSA and the GCHQ, its equivalent in Britain, and other agencies around the world. But fantastic on the face of it that this revealed scale of surveillance appears. It really is small deal compared with what is planned. And I'm going to get into that later in the video cast. But it was very welcome to have confirmation of what some of us have been saying for a long time, that people have no idea of the scale under which they are watched, tracked, under surveillance in increasingly multiple ways. And of course, when someone reveals to the public what the public need to know, you'd think there'd be a round of applause, and there has been from people with a brain. But from a government point of view, he has been charged by the American government under the Espionage Act, which had only been used to prosecute 3 people since 1917.